Well, look, I think the bottom line is we're going to see more and more businesses start to mandate vaccination. I think people are a little bit fed up with the situation that we find ourselves in with this continued spread. And you're going to see more businesses implement vaccine mandates, particularly for people who want to return to the office. The fact that the federal government is going to mandate vaccination for the armed forces and for federal workers, require them to either get vaccinated or submit to some kind of supervision, some kind of testing, I think is going to provide cover for a lot of private industry to do the same. And once these vaccines hopefully become fully authorized, fully approved by the FDA, I think that's going to give additional impetus to businesses to give them the confidence that they have the legal ground to stand on in terms of requiring vaccination.
I want to go to the booster shots and this news that the FDA will soon approve a booster shot for immunocompromised individuals. What do you think the timeline is from this point to when it is approved for all individuals? And along the spectrum are also those with underlying conditions which were preferred in terms of being in line for the vaccine in the first place.
Yeah, it remains to be seen what the authorization from the FDA is going to look like, how broad it's going to be. I would suspect that it's going to be broad language, and they'll leave it up to CDC's advisory committee, ACIP, to issue more granular recommendations. But, you know, it's a question of whether or not the FDA is going to authorize this third dose right now for people who are on active immunosuppressant drugs, so people who've undergone an organ transplantation and might be undergoing active chemotherapy, or whether the language that they use is going to be people who are at increased risk of COVID because of some immunosuppressive element. So that might also include people with chronic diseases or people who are on previous therapy that might leave them more immunocompromised on the whole. I suspect it's going to be the latter, that the FDA is going to issue broader language and leave it up to CDC to interpret that language and potentially, if they want to, go down the path of issuing more granular recommendations, do that. But ultimately, I think we're heading in the direction of making boosters available to the broader population. As you know, Israel has boosted their entire population over the age of 60. They'll probably be done this month. So we'll have this week, so we'll have pretty good data coming out of Israel on what the impact of the third dose is and what the side effect profile looks like. But I think people who were vaccinated, and I've said this for a while, people who were vaccinated last, December, January, February, which includes a lot of people who are in vulnerable situations, nursing home patients, long-term care facilities, also healthcare workers who are exposed to a lot of COVID. I think that we're seeing evidence of declining vaccine efficacy over time. It's been a while, and that those people should be eligible to receive boosters. I think we ultimately get there. It's just going to be a question of how much time it takes the CDC to ultimately arrive at that point. Now, final point, anyone who's been vaccinated recently over the summer, certainly anyone who's vaccinated now, I think people who have a fresh vaccination, the evidence shows that that's going to provide pretty strong protection against Delta. So I don't think people who have recent vaccinations need to be concerned about declining efficacy. We're talking really about people who are vaccinated in that initial cohort.
Dr. Gottlieb, it's Scott. It's nice to see you this morning. On that note, I'm hoping that you can provide some more clarity on this news report that was going around yesterday that I know you've since seen, this so-called preprint study, which is said to raise concern about the effectiveness of mRNA vaccines against the Delta variant. Now, this is allegedly from July when Delta was most dominant. And they say that the Pfizer vaccine was only 42% effective in preventing infection, and Moderna was 76% effective against infection. Do you have any more clarity about what I'm talking about now that I think you've had an opportunity to look into this?
Yeah, I've read this study. I've also had the opportunity to talk to some of my colleagues at Pfizer. As you know, I'm on the board of Pfizer about that study. I think that there's some things with that study that weren't fully corrected for. And I've long said that I think these two vaccines, these two mRNA vaccines are comparable in terms of their efficacy. I've said that when there are studies that have come out that suggesting that Pfizer might be better. I've said that when there are studies that came out suggesting that Moderna might be better. So I've been consistent on that point. The reality is that the Pfizer vaccine was approved first, and it was initially distributed to healthcare workers, to nursing homes, and also the distribution of the Pfizer vaccine was biased towards hospital-based distribution, where you were likely distributing it to a more sick population. And the reason why they did that initially is because, remember, it needed to be stored at minus 80 degrees, so the hospitals were better equipped to handle a vaccine that had those storage requirements. The Moderna vaccine initially It was approved later, so it wasn't distributed to the nursing homes initially and the healthcare workers in the same quantities as Pfizer. And it was also initially distributed through community sites where there might have been healthier patients. So to the extent that we're seeing declining efficacy over time from both of these vaccines, and I believe it's a class effect, the Pfizer vaccine was distributed earlier and was also distributed to people who might be at more risk of either contracting COVID or coming into contact with COVID. The authors of this study didn't correct for that. They didn't fully correct for that. So I think that the finding of this disparity between the two vaccines is an artifact of how these vaccines were distributed. I think these vaccines are largely comparable in terms of their efficacy, and I think we should be providing boosters for both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine for people who were vaccinated 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago, which is what Israel's doing, what Germany is going to be doing, what the UK is doing as well.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.